But did the writers mean 1260 literal days?
For more than 2,000 years, Bible scholars have identified the day for a year principle. Long before the birth of Christ, the Jewish translators of the Old Testament into Greek were the first to apply this principle to the book of Daniel. From the 12th century, Christian writers have also identified the 1260 days as being 1260 years. During this time, the church would flee from the dragon, but God would prepare a place of safety for his people. One such place where New Testament truths were preserved against the growing power of the Bishop of Rome was in northern Italy. At the end of the 4th century, Ambrose, Bishop of Milan, maintained an evangelical theology that is difficult to separate from that refounded by the Protestant faith 1,000 years later. Here in these plains and mountains west of Milan, witnesses still held to the doctrines of the primitive church and spoke against the growing superstitions and perversions in the church. Claudius, Bishop of Turin, who is often referred to as the Protestant of the 9th century, also upheld the authority of Scripture. These nearby valleys and mountains became a refuge for perhaps the oldest and noblest of the line of witnesses representing the church in the wilderness, the Waldenses. Their devotion and perseverance fill some of the brightest pages of the church's history. Many have claimed that the name Waldenses is derived from Peter Waldo, who founded the Poor Men of Lyon late in the 12th century. But history shows that groups of evangelicals in northern Italy upheld the teachings of the primitive church long before the arrival of Waldo.
Just outside the Waldensian church headquarters in Torre Pellice is this statue of Henry Arnauld, the famous 17th century leader of the Waldenses, or of the Vaudois, as they were called. He once said of his people,
"The Vaudois are, in fact, descended from those refugees from Italy who, after St. Paul had there preached the gospel, abandoned their beautiful country and fled, like the woman mentioned in the Apocalypse, to these wild mountains, where they have to this day handed down the gospel from father to son in the same purity as it was preached to Paul."
Historians have stated that the greatest engineering skill could not have better adapted these valleys for the purpose of offering refuge to fugitives. Each one opens into another like a series of interlocking chambers that, taken together, form a single fortress of amazing strength.
and it was to this fortress prepared for them by God himself that the Waldenses fled during the 1260 years of papal supremacy.
In the heart of these mountains is situated the most important region in all their valleys, the Pra del Torno. To this valley, watered by the Engrogna River and clothed with cornfields, pastures, fruit trees and mighty chestnuts, the Waldenses often retreated when attacked by their enemies. It was here, too, that their missionaries were trained at the College of the Barbs. Here the Bible was their only textbook. In the centuries before the printing press, they would memorize whole Gospels and many of the epistles.
Over here on this ancient stone table, The trainee barbs took their turns at transcribing the scriptures into the Roman vernacular, for the Waldenses were among the first peoples of Europe to obtain a translation of the scriptures.
Later, disguised as peddlers, the Waldenses travelled throughout southern and central Europe. By concealing copies of the New Testament in their clothing, they were able to leave more than just material comforts with their customers.
As the Waldenses increased in numbers and influence, the Church of Rome became increasingly uneasy. It recognized that if this movement was permitted to expand, it could one day overcome all that Rome had taken centuries to achieve.
At the beginning of the 14th century, the terrible fury of the Pope's inquisitors began. The simple, peace-loving Waldenses became part of the church in the wilderness as foretold by John the Revelator. But just as the woman of Revelation 12 was helped by the earth, which opened up its mouth and swallowed the waters of the dragon, so the mountains gave protection to the Waldenses during the Crusades against them. The densely timbered forests, the seemingly impassable mountain ranges, and the very remoteness of their valleys served as their only defences. When their villages and churches were periodically destroyed, the many caves among the rocks became their homes and cathedrals.
This cave is in the Ingrogna Valley, not far from the Pra del Torno. It is known as the Church of the Cave, and it's not difficult to see why the enemies of the Waldenses had trouble finding these hideaways. It must have been a time of fearful but warm fellowship, as neighbours gathered from far and wide to seek comfort and safety here deep in the bowels of the earth.